Stop Scrubbing Your Past, a Zen Story to End Self-Reproach. Right now, a cold, heavy ache might be pooling directly behind your solar plexus, a sharp physical knot that tightens whenever a specific unvoiced memory surfaces from the past. You may feel a persistent restriction stretching across your diaphragm, the quiet physical echo of keeping an ancient personal failure closely guarded within the dark center of your chest. There is a deep, isolating sorrow in carrying the secret belief that you are fundamentally stained by an old choice, walking through your days while constantly exerting an invisible muscular force to prevent that old regret from showing through your outer presentation. Maybe you have felt this too, a sudden chill in the center of the body, when the mind replays a word or an action that cannot be undone, followed by an immediate wave of self-reproach that leaves you emotionally exhausted. Let the slow, damp rhythm of the autumn rain settle outside your room, noticing how the cool moisture gathers along the outer window ledges without asking you to alter a single detail of your personal history. You are under no obligation to wash away the markings of your past tonight, nor do you need to present an unblemished, perfect record for the benefit of the dark. Let the wide frame beneath your spine accept the full, unmanaged weight of your body, observing how surface or fill holds you without requiring you to scrub away the deep stains or prove your innocence before you are allowed to rest. The darkness does not demand that you erase your private regrets before you are permitted to find shelter. Your core being is completely spacious, intact, and safe, and we are not going to force a sudden, aggressive purification upon your spirit tonight. There is a profound, surprising paradox in the way we carry our secrets. Because a human life does not become ruined by the presence of a dark memory, the mind finds its true freedom only when it realizes that the absolute purity we are trying to force upon ourselves is a heavy illusion, and that our desperate attempt to scrape away our history is what actually keeps the pain alive. We often believe that our continuous self-punishment is an act of correction, a vital internal labor that somehow pays the debt of our past errors. Yet this permanent friction is not a source of healing, but a slow exhaustion of our vital energy. We treat our awareness like a fragile white cloth that must never be soiled, forgetting that the baseline nature of our spirit is actually like a massive stone structure, vast enough to hold the deepest colors of life without losing its permanent, silent reality. Right now, dear friend, as you lie awake in the gathering quiet, you might notice how the mind naturally tries to return to the scene of the old mistake, checking the edges of the memory to see if the coloration can be somehow altered by your current thoughts. Perhaps you have carried this specific weight for months or even years, allowing the shadow of that single choice to define the entire baseline value of who you are. If it feels right, let your awareness notice the physical exhaustion that comes from this constant internal scrubbing, acknowledging how tired your chest has become from bracing against your own history. Tonight, your original structure does not need to be violently altered to find its peace, and there is no necessity for you to fully resolve the lingering shame or completely clarify the dark waters of your past before the morning sun arrives. Take a slow, unhurried breath, letting the cool air drop down into the lowest part of your abdomen without trying to achieve a perfect expansion or a sudden emotional release. As the air leaves your frame, let the tension behind your eyes fall away, allowing the full mass of your body to settle into the support beneath you. There is absolutely no requirement for you to fix your past or to repair the unconfessed errors of your life before you are allowed to completely yield to the night. The dark markings of your history can rest undisturbed like an old indigo dye absorbed deep into a gray stone basin, and the anxieties of tomorrow can wait in the valley without your constant attention. In a short while, we will travel down into a quiet, low-ceilinged courtyard dye house near a slow tidal river, where the air smells of fermented minerals and damp slate. And we will observe a young apprentice who spent his days frantically trying to scrub a dark spill out of a massive stone basin. This story will guide us toward a completely different way of understanding our personal path, showing us an ancient wisdom that knows how to let the deep colors of our experience rest within our grain, without destroying our structural peace. For now, simply allow your physical frame to yield to the immense gravity of the earth, knowing that your deeper awareness remains completely safe, silent, and entirely untroubled by the weight of the unvoiced world. As you rest here in the growing dark, notice how the natural weight of your body is being fully supported by the structure beneath you, requiring no active alignment or moral justification from your conscious mind. The bed does not ask you to prove your worthiness, and the room does not require you to present a clean record before it shields you from the night. You can feel the quiet, non-negotiable support of the ground rising up to meet your spine, offering an absolute refuge that exists completely independent of your past choices or your hidden regrets. The internal voice that insists you must remain completely alert to punish yourself, for old failures can begin to lose its volume, transforming into a distant, meaningless murmur that carries no authority in this quiet hour. Let your breathing become a soft, automatic movement that rises and falls like the natural shifting of shadows across the ceiling. You do not need to govern the rhythm, and you do not need to measure the depth, for the body is perfectly capable of maintaining its own balance without the interference of your anxious willpower. The constant calculation of how to undo the past or defend your presentation can finally pause, letting the analytical mind step down from its post at the center of the brow. You are stepping completely out of the active workshop of self-correction for the remainder of this evening, leaving the raw materials of your life open and untended in the quiet night. The space you inhabit right now is completely secure, requiring no explanations, no apologies, and no performative goodness to maintain its deep, heavy quiet. You can allow the image of the permanent stain to fade from your muscles, realizing that you do not have to be perfectly unblemished to be safe. The darkness around you is an unconditional invitation to drop your hands from the coarse sand, letting the entire world find its own balance while you sink into the profound, uninspected peace of your own resting frame. Feel the soft, cool expansion of your chest as the air enters, carrying no demands, no expectations, and no judgments from the outer world. The breathing has become a quiet dialogue between your body and the room, a slow, natural tide that rises and falls without a single witness to measure its accuracy. You are finally returning to the home that never truly left your side, the quiet space of simple being that lives beneath every role you play and every regret you bear. In this space, you are completely enough just as you are, marked, porous, and beautifully real, resting securely in the deep, heavy peace that has claimed the night. Let the last stray thoughts dissolve into the deep ink of the room, as the boundary between your awareness and the silence begins to soften into a gentle blur. The internal workshop is completely quiet. The tools are resting on the wooden benches, and the raw slate has been left alone, leaving only the cool, safe rest of the mist clearing. You can sleep now, letting the body sink fully into the embrace of the earth, knowing that the morning will bring its own sky, but tonight belongs entirely to the uninspected peace of your own silent heart. Allow your awareness to descend slowly into a quiet, low-ceilinged courtyard dye house situated near the slow, rhythmic movement of a tidal river. In this secluded valley workspace, the long hours are marked by the steady drip of natural pigment and the cool, damp breath of the autumn rain. In this dye house lived a young apprentice named Taku, whose shoulders carried the permanent, heavy restriction of an internal secret. Months ago, during a long night shift, Taku had accidentally tipped a massive vat of highly concentrated, dark indigo dye directly over the central fixture of the workshop. This fixture was a massive, unpolished gray slate basin, carved from the deep bedrock of the mountain and used by generations of artisans for rinsing raw textiles. Taku carried a persistent, sharp anxiety that if the deep blue coloration could not be completely removed from the porous mineral, he would be permanently exposed as an unfaithful keeper of the craft. This hidden worry drove the young apprentice to spend the early mornings kneeling on the damp flags, holding a rough linen straining sack filled with coarse sand. Every time the morning light revealed the dark blue veins embedded deep within the stone grain, Taku would begin to scrub with frantic energy, trying to scrape the permanent markings out of existence before the other workers arrived. The primary difficulty was simply the nature of the slate stone, which was inherently porous and held the dark indigo within its unique mineral structure. Taku, however, turned every dark vein into an immediate personal crisis that required his continuous muscular strain. He believed that by forcing the stone back to its original unblemished state, he could guarantee his own safety within the lineage of the house. Yet, this constant friction only added to his internal exhaustion, reinforcing the silent conviction that his entire value depended upon erasing the true history of the basin. The frantic rubbing often caused his fingers to become raw, accidentally cracking his wooden die paddle and leaving his arms to ache deeply by the time the evening shadow reached the wall. One damp afternoon, while a heavy mist was rising from the river reeds, an old master die maker named Master Jun walked slowly into the rinsing area. Master Jun carried no harsh cleaning brushes, moving with the unhurried ease of someone who had spent decades watching the natural colors settle into the cloth without human panic. The elder did not offer words of praise for the neatness of the stone, nor did he criticize the dark blue circles surrounding the basin. Instead, Master Jun sat down on a low cedar bench near the water channel, placing a single, unadorned object onto the worn timber table. The object was a cracked wooden die paddle, worn completely smooth at the handle and showing decades of deep indigo saturation along its split edges. It was completely plain, bearing the natural, dark coloration of the workshop without any protective varnish or decorative carving. The paddle sat quietly on the dark wood, its cold surface slowly reflecting the dim light of the window, without moving a single millimeter from its position. Taku looked down at the stained piece of timber, then at his own trembling hands, which were still stained with the gray dust of the coarse sand. Master Jun reached out and gently slid the cracked wooden paddle closer to the edge where the massive slate basin rested. The old master looked closely at the young apprentice's rigid posture, noting the tight restriction in the chest and the shallow breath that caught in the throat whenever the light caught the blue stone. Master Jun asked a very quiet question, wondering why the apprentice spent so much energy trying to force a deep mineral basin to forget the color it had so beautifully absorbed. Taku felt a sudden sharp ache behind his ribs, a deep feeling of fatigue being recognized in the open air. He explained that if he did not remove the indigo veins, the stone would be permanently ruined, and if the basin remained stained by his error, his place in the workshop would be completely broken. Taku's voice was a low whisper against the damp breeze, exposing the quiet terror of being fundamentally flawed, the fear of letting his true, marked history show through the presentation. Master Jun did not argue with Taku's anxiety, nor did he try to stop the river water from flowing through the stone channels. Instead, the elder reached down and picked up the cracked wooden paddle, placing its flat side directly into a deep pool of clear water inside the slate basin, letting the timber rest loosely against the dark, stained interior of the mineral. The wood did not scrape, and it did not try to force the stone to change its coloration. It simply held its place, remaining perfectly stable within its own heavy form, while a cold wind began to move through the courtyard shutters. The massive slate basin did not shatter under the sudden touch of the wood, remaining solid upon its foundation, while the clear river water began to ripple naturally across the dark blue grain, revealing the unique, deep architecture of the rock without a single scrape of panic. The old master stood up, his rough cotton robes rustling softly against the cedar bench. Master Jun remarked that a massive slate does not preserve its purity by remaining completely white, for a rinsing basin finds its true identity by being vast enough to hold every deep color without losing its structural permanence. The elder then walked slowly toward the tidal river path, leaving Taku alone with the cracked paddle and the steady sound of the water moving through the stone channels in the quiet afternoon. The young apprentice sat perfectly still on the low stool, listening to the river flow against the reeds, feeling the heavy, uncarved reality of the slate basin pressing into the palms of his hands. A quiet understanding began to stir in the corners of Taku's mind, though the full depth of the old master's lesson was still hidden behind the habits of many years. The frantic linen sack began to look less like a tool of correction, and more like a rigid instrument of his own agitation. For the first time in many months, Taku did not reach forward to continue the scrubbing, letting his arms rest completely loose on his knees, while the gray evening light settled over the wet floorboards. Let the image of that damp dye house begin to soften in your mind, just as Taku allowed the cracked wooden paddle to rest undisturbed against the stained slate. The cool river breeze is still moving through the eaves outside, but the desperate necessity to force your own internal life into an unblemished shape has started to release its hold on your muscles. You can feel the quiet, radiant stability of the raw slate basin, an object that does not ask to be scrubbed, corrected, or defended against its history. It simply holds its place on the floor, completely safe within its own unpolished depth. As we pause here, the night continues to deepen over your room, and the thoughts that ran so rapidly through the events of the day are beginning to lose their velocity. The story has placed a solid foundation in the dark, but there are deeper vats along the river that have not yet revealed their form to the young apprentice. Let yourself rest in the space between the dark stain and the clear water, letting your breath rise and fall like the deep wind moving through the valley trees. This slow immersion into the quiet architecture of the courtyard dye house is not a demand to turn your inner world into a cold block of stone, or to pretend that the old memories do not carry a genuine sting. True Buddhist insight never asks you to erase the natural warmth of your heart, or to become completely indifferent to the complex history that shaped your path. It is pointing our attention toward a much gentler sanctuary that exists quietly beneath the constant, frantic effort to force our lives into an unsoiled presentation. The grueling friction we experience on a random night is rarely caused by the simple historical fact of a past mistake, or by the natural limitations that marked our younger choices. The true distress begins when we operate under the silent assumption that our safety depends on maintaining an immaculate exterior, believing that our core value has been permanently corrupted because a dark pigment has entered our grain. When we observe Taku's desperate handling of the linen-straining sack, we can see exactly how the mind builds its own invisible prison out of thin paper memories. The primary discomfort was simply the natural physical spread of the indigo pigment, which carried a rich, deep coloration into the porous gray slate basin. That is merely the baseline reality of occurrence, the inevitable texture of a human life that has encountered a heavy season of error or misjudgment. The secondary wound, the one that truly drained the young apprentice's spirit, was the heavy internal script he spun around that mineral. His mind began insisting that a single dark marking meant absolute unworthiness, and that failing to scrape the color out would leave him permanently excluded from the warmth of the workshop. We repeat this painful pattern every single day when we take a moment of personal failure or an old choice that deviates from our ideal and turn it into a lifelong crisis because we are terrified of our own internal markings. What we commonly call attachment is just this tight, panicky grip that demands our daily history look perfectly white before we allow ourselves to take a full breath. It is the deep fatigue of trying to maintain a flawless, unyielding facade while your own chest is actively trembling from a total lack of internal space behind the ribs. We find ourselves constantly running our fingers over our old regrets, much like Taku checking the stone in the midnight hours. This constant correction turns every natural memory into an act of self-reproach, and every quiet evening into a courtroom, where we judge ourselves for carrying any unique coloration at all. We mistake this frantic grinding for an act of self-honesty, yet it operates like a slow erosion of our vital reserves, leaving our spirits completely hollowed out by the time the daylight fades. True mindfulness is nothing more than the capacity to look at the rising shame, without immediately reaching for a handful of coarse sand to scrape it out of existence. It is the moment you feel a wave of old regret or guilt, and instead of scrubbing at the grain to make it look unsoiled, you simply allow the deep color to exist in the open air. When we practice this deep presence, we are shifting our position from the frantic apprentice to the cracked wooden paddle resting loosely inside the stone basin. We begin to understand that the heavy thoughts passing through our awareness are merely temporary weather, like the gray drizzle moving through the river reeds. They arrive, they saturate the surface, and they eventually dissolve into the background, provided we do not turn their presence into a dangerous emergency that requires our permanent muscular resistance. The profound reality of impermanence reminds us that our feelings, our reputations, And even the judgments of our peers are entirely fluid, changing their shape from season to season. Trying to build a permanent sense of safety by keeping your life perfectly free of dark markings is like trying to prevent a river stone from absorbing the moisture of the stream. When we accept that everything carries its own unpredictable pattern of absorption, the desperate craving to appear completely unblemished begins to lose its authority over our nerves. We discover that we can allow ourselves to be deeply saturated, just like the massive gray slate waiting on the worn timber floorboards. The stone does not cry out for an iron hammer to chip away its blue veins. It rests in its heavy, organic mass, completely untroubled by the depth of the dye. Let this understanding soften the quiet restriction behind your ribs, allowing the delicate muscles around your diaphragm to release their guard completely. The shame you feel tonight is not proof that your spirit is ruined, but rather a sign that you have been trying to satisfy an impossible standard of purity for far too long. Compassion is not a distant spiritual achievement. It is simply the gentle willingness to let the slate basin be exactly what it is, acknowledging how exhausted your own fingers have become. It is the choice to look at your unique configuration without a single drop of judgment, recognizing that you were only trying to protect the honor of the craft. You can let the raw materials of your life remain entirely unmanaged for the remainder of this night. The river will continue to flow without your constant scrubbing, and your baseline value remains perfectly whole even when the surface looks dark in the shadows. The mind may try to drag you back to the workbench, replaying the moments where you felt you had to be the flawless container to keep your life from falling into pieces. Yet, each time an old memory arises, you can look at it as a single drop of water falling into the basin, separate from the stone that holds it. You do not have to chase it with the cloth, and you do not have to treat its presence as a permanent corruption of your loyalty. Slowly, the ancient teaching moves away from a grand philosophy and becomes a gentle permission for your shoulders to drop downward. The relief we seek is not found by successfully forcing the stone to forget the pigment. It is found by discovering that your original nature is already vast enough to hold the entire stain, even when the coloration runs in directions that your younger self never intended to spill. The cracked wooden paddle holds its place without a single apology, and you too are permitted to exist in this quiet room without presenting an unblemished face to the dark sky. If it feels right, let your internal attention drop gently down into the physical space that your body occupies against the bedding. There is no requirement to adjust your posture or to force your limbs into a rigid geometry of meditation. Perhaps you might simply notice the quiet rise of your collarbones as the cool air fills the upper chest, and how they naturally sink back down toward the earth as the breath leaves you. We are not trying to construct an extraordinary state of spiritual perfection tonight. We are simply letting the heavy, unsaid weight of the afternoon find its natural balance, allowing your physical frame to exist without any duty to keep the surface of your life perfectly unsoiled under the dark stain. Let your awareness pool gently around the back of the neck, where the effort of carrying a hidden regret often leaves a dense, hidden tension. You might imagine that the tightness there is beginning to dissolve, softening much like a patch of gray slate, receiving the first light of a gentle morning sun. There is no need to command this softening to happen immediately. Even noticing that the throat is holding an alert watch is completely enough to let the release begin. Let that heavy warmth travel down past the collarbones, loosening the small muscles that keep the shoulders pulled tight, and allowing the full weight of your back to sink into the support beneath you. As you rest in this quiet inner landscape, a thought may drift into view, perhaps replaying a conversation where you felt you fell short, or calculating how to make yourself flawless for an encounter tomorrow. When this happens, there is absolutely no reason to fight the thought, or to treat it like a dangerous blemish that must be violently scraped out of existence. Instead, you might gently give it a name, whispering to yourself that this is simply the old pattern of scrubbing the stone to protect the presentation of the self. By simply recognizing the pattern, you are stepping back from the coarse sand, choosing not to exhaust your fingers in the cold mist. Perhaps you can bring to mind the image of the cracked wooden paddle from our story, holding it lightly in the center of your imagination. See its plain, dark shape, its worn wooden texture, and the total absence of any intricate decoration. If it feels right, take that current worry, that heavy obligation to satisfy an impossible standard of purity, and imagine placing it gently upon that porous surface. You do not need to push it away, and you do not need to hide it under a heavy canopy. Just let the unvoiced distress rest in the open air, letting the stable form of the timber carry the weight that your mind has been containing for hours. Watch what happens to the mental picture when the necessity for aggressive control is removed from the equation. The dark indigo does not turn into a dangerous flood, nor does it demand that you apologize for its sudden appearance. As you watch closer, the sharp edges of the worry might begin to soften. The heavy thoughts loosening, slowly settling down until the stone below shows nothing more than a soft, radiant vein that warms the space around it. The image changes entirely on its own, not because you forced a sudden healing, but because you stopped pretending that your raw nature was a danger to the room. There is no pressure to reach a state of absolute emotional resolution before this evening ends. If your mind continues to wander back to the misty dye house, or if your chest still holds a faint echo of restriction, let that be exactly as it is. True inner peace does not require an entirely empty mind. It means discovering that you can remain perfectly grounded, like the heavy slate basin, even while the cracked wooden paddle continues to rest in the center of the framework. You can return to the simple physical sensation of the air entering your lungs whenever you are ready. Let your breath return to its completely unmanaged cadence, requiring no supervision or correction from your analytical thoughts. The body knows exactly how to breathe itself without your constant maintenance, just as the river wind knows how to flow through the bare reeds without an apprentice to measure its velocity. You have stepped out of the active workshop for tonight, and the heavy tools of your life are entirely quiet. Allow the weight of your head to drop a fraction lower into the bed, letting the image of the frantic scraping fade completely into the peaceful darkness that surrounds you. Observe the slow, natural pause that occurs at the bottom of each exhalation, a tiny pocket of stillness that requires no effort to maintain. In this space, there are no obligations to fulfill, and there are no expectations to meet. You are completely permitted to let the stone be as marked or as quiet as it wants to be, without worrying that the color will overtake your sanctuary. The safety you seek is already here, held in the simple, non-reactive presence of the dark room around you. Let the boundary between your physical frame and the bed beneath you become pleasantly soft and indistinct. You do not need to brace yourself against the mattress, and you do not need to hold your shoulders in a posture of permanent readiness. The support beneath you is total, carrying your whole presence without asking for a single drop of strength in return. You can let the entire world find its own balance tonight, while you remain safely anchored in the deep, uninspected quiet of your own resting frame. The thoughts that ran so frantically through the events of the afternoon are beginning to lose their momentum, dissolving like light mist falling into the corners of the riverside. You do not have to settle the unanswered questions before you are allowed to sleep, and you do not have to present a perfect plan for the morning. The dark air holds you completely whole, offering a refuge that requires no active management from your tired mind to remain perfectly beautiful. Leave the low courtyard dye house behind, letting the slow weight of your imagination travel even further down the riverside trail, entering a deep, silent canyon clearing, where the water is perfectly clear and chilled by the presence of a solitary stonewashing pool. In this upland sanctuary, the ancient willow trees are weathered by decades of high floods, blending naturally into the dark limestone cliffs that surround the clearing. Here, at the edge of an old riverbank, lived a solitary hermit who spent the long hours monitoring a vast open-air slate vat in the center of the workspace. Taku had traveled up to this quiet place during the height of the autumn rains, leaving the clean, competitive workshops of the valley behind, carrying nothing but a simple woven pack and the deep, heavy exhaustion that comes from a lifetime of keeping every internal failure completely hidden from view. Inside this high mountain shelter, the only sound was the steady rushing of the river outside, skipping over the smooth gray rocks and disappearing into the low pine groves below. The guardian of this upland workspace was a quiet teacher who did not use harsh sand to scratch the tools of the craft and did not panic when the mountain wind forced the heavy autumn water to swirl through the corners of the pool. When travelers arrived at the heavy stone stairs, their chests tight with the unvoiced constraints of their daily lives, the hermit simply offered them a low wooden stool near the central waterbed, letting them watch the quiet current without a single word of instruction. As the midnight hours began to settle over the high ridge, a sudden, violent seasonal storm rolled in from the coast, making it impossible to keep the dark indigo water separate from the rising river channel. A massive influx of swift water poured directly into the main slate vat, threatening to completely wash away the fragile mineral solutions, turning the top layers into a turbulent, clouded swirling of river mud and dark blue pigment. A sharp, familiar panic flared inside Taku's chest, the identical suffocating urgency that always arose whenever an unexpected internal memory threatened to disrupt the peace of his workspace. Taku immediately reached for a long, coarse linen straining sack resting near the woodpile, straining the muscles of his arms, frantically trying to intercept the incoming current and block the dark, freezing patches through the wide container. For many exhausting minutes, Taku maintained this desperate, impossible battle, his fingers turning numb from the biting cold as the linen tool chased the dark indigo through the violent water. His breath became a rapid, shallow gasp that echoed sharply against the stone walls, and his mind spun into a chaotic loop of worry, wondering how his master's workshop could survive the night if the primary stone was permanently ruined by the storm. Taku expected the hermit to join the struggle, or at least to offer a thicker wooden shield to help block the incoming wind. Yet, the old teacher remained perfectly still on the low cedar bench, his hands resting loosely inside the wide sleeves of a rough hemp robe, his eyes calm and entirely untroubled by the dark patterns expanding through the basin. The hermit finally stood up, his soft straw sandals making no sound against the worn timber floorboards. As his steps approached the edge of the turbulent waterbed, the old teacher did not attempt to filter the melting silt, nor did his hand reach for a fresh brush to scratch at the vulnerability of the stone. Instead, the master gently placed a warm, firm palm over Taku's tense wrist, waiting in absolute silence until the young apprentice's fingers stopped gripping the linen sack so tightly. With a slow, compassionate movement, the teacher took the coarse sack completely away from the basin, allowing the rushing current and the dark indigo to settle freely and openly into the vast mineral volume. Without the artificial agitation of the linen tool, the cold moisture sank deeply into the gray veins, turning the top layer of the entire bed into a dark ink-like pool that looked completely unpolished and stained in the dim light of the room. Taku stood back against the cedar wall, his chest heaving, bracing for the total collapse of the tool, terrified that the darkness would now be permanent and the shame would claim everyone under the roof. Yet, as the sand settled into the porous crevices, the slate did not split, and the deep core of the stone did not lose its baseline structural weight. The massive basin simply held the entire heavy mixture within its deep, uninsulated frame, completely indifferent to the sudden loss of absolute neatness, allowing the cold winter elements to rest directly upon its surface without a single sign of resistance. The master looked down into the dark, clouded pool, then turned a gentle gaze toward Taku's strained, frightened face. The teacher reached down, took a cracked wooden paddle, and instead of pressing downward to smooth the surface, made one tiny, delicate stroke through the water, creating a narrow gap that allowed the open water of the stream to pass directly into the center of the basin. The old hermit remarked that the deepest slate had never survived by keeping the mountain wind out of its grain, for the mineral was deep enough to let the dark water turn into a clear mirror, without losing a single fraction of its structural depth. The guardian explained that a human soul does not find its true transformation by maintaining a rigid, frozen composure at the top of the mind, but by discovering that its internal space is vast enough to let the dark river be exactly what it is, without needing to hide the vulnerability behind a mountain of false perfection. Taku stood perfectly still in the quiet shelter, the cool air moving against his wet palms. In that silent moment of total non-action, a subtle, beautiful transformation began to move through the long muscles of his back. Taku did not try to reach for the tools again, and his mind did not attempt to force the anxious thoughts to vanish. The young apprentice simply sat down on the low wooden bench next to the old teacher, placed his open hands flat against his knees, and chose to sit quietly with the uncertain, muddy coldness of the riverbed, stopping the ancient, exhausting habit of treating every fearful thought as an absolute truth that had to be violently compressed out of existence. This small shift did not make Taku instantly perfect, nor did it magically clear the freezing moisture from the stone before the morning arrived. It was a real, grounded change in his relationship with suffering, a quiet decision to stop pretending that his core had to be completely unblemished by the winter, to be worthy of taking up space in the hall. When the first faint light of the dawn finally filtered through the high cedar canopy, painting the shelter walls in soft, quiet grays, the heavy moisture had naturally evaporated through the open gap, leaving the hidden gray veins underneath perfectly radiant, deep and warm, resting securely beneath the dark earth that lay undisturbed at the bottom of the basin. Let the image of that mountain riverbed begin to soften in your awareness. Just as Taku allowed the cracked wooden paddle to rest undisturbed against the stone base, the cold canyon wind is still moving through the pines outside, but the desperate necessity to compress your own internal climate has completely abandoned your nervous system. You can feel the vast, unyielding depth of your own basic presence, reminding you that your spirit is naturally large enough to hold both the cold storm and the radiant vein without losing its essential peace. As we continue, the night carries you further into its quiet depths, and the obligation to appear completely untrolled is losing its ancient grip on your soul. The experience of Taku in the high canyon clearing exposes the deep, intricate clockwork of our everyday emotional struggles. When the sudden surge of mountain water rushed down from the upper ridges, the movement of the wet silt was simply an occurrence of the physical world, a spontaneous interaction between weather and terrain. The intense suffering that the young apprentice experienced did not come from the simple presence of the heavy water, but from the sudden, panicky resistance that demanded the slate basin remain entirely insulated from the surrounding forest elements. We live our lives in a state of continuous internal management, measuring our current feelings against an imaginary standard of absolute personal invulnerability. When a heavy drop of regret or a memory of a past conflict threatens that standard, the mind instantly responds with sharp self-judgment, treating a natural influx of difficulty as an unforgivable flaw in our stability. We can discover a vital distinction between the basic unavoidable weight that life naturally deposits in our path and the massive, extra structure of misery that our own thoughts build around it. The natural current includes the moments when our energy levels drop, when our plans experience sudden interruptions, or when our efforts fail to shield us from the unpredictable changes of life. These occurrences are like the wild mountain silt, raw and heavy, carrying no internal desire to destroy our peace. The true suffering begins when we take that silt and try to whip it into an aggressive battle, replaying past errors and rehearsing future scenarios until our minds are completely blinded by the gray sludge. We take a single moment of vulnerability and weave it into a permanent identity of failure, trying to fix ourselves through constant shame, while forgetting that the compression itself is what strains the heart. Imagine a heavy hempen rope bridge suspended across a misty mountain ravine, designed to receive the passing weight of the winter snow as it drops naturally from the high cliffs during the changing season. The original presence of the falling frost is simply the mountain doing its work, a neutral reality that the flexible fibers beneath can hold without a single snap. The true destruction happens only if the keeper of the path climbs out onto the narrow timber beams, frantically trying to catch every single snowflake with a small silk umbrella, to keep the structure from feeling a single ounce of moisture. The extra strain of the frantic balancing, combined with the continuous tension in the arms, is what actually breaks the watcher's strength, creating a state of deep exhaustion out of a natural cycle that would have settled harmlessly through the gaps on its own organic timeline. True internal stillness does not happen because you have successfully built an airtight wall over every difficult memory, or because you have finally found a way to guarantee that your daily path will never feel turbulent again. Peace arrives when you fundamentally alter the way your awareness relates to the presence of the internal storm. We often operate under the mistaken impression that if we just scold ourselves severely enough, or if we maintain a state of permanent numbness, we can protect our hearts from the pain of being human. This approach is like an artisan trying to pack a porous stone so tight that the minerals inside can never breathe. The immense force we apply to the control only increases our exhaustion, leaving our internal resources completely dried up by the time the daylight fades. Buddhist insight reminds us that our desperate need for approval is driven by the illusion that our core self is a fragile glass ornament that will shatter into 1,000 pieces if a single sign of movement is seen by the world. We treat our emotional lives like an artificial presentation that must be continuously insulated and polished, fearing that any visible imperfection will prove we are fundamentally unlovable. Yet, the reality of your basic awareness is much closer to the vast depth of the slate vats inside the clearing. The container does not lose its essential stability when the muddy current falls around its base, and it does not become superior when the room is perfectly clear. It remains entirely present, heavy, and deep, holding the entire mixture within its embrace without needing to defend its reputation to the dark. When you spend your evening hours replaying past mistakes, trying to figure out exactly how you could have appeared more composed, you are attempting to steady a current that has already left the ridge. The words have already been spoken, and the room has already moved on. Yet the mind continues to strain against the linen sacks, exhausting the nervous system over an event that has completely vanished into the night. This constant correction is not a sign of spiritual progress, but a manifestation of fear trying to control an unpredictable winter. We dread the uncertainty of tomorrow, so we try to prearrange every drop, forgetting that the real strength of the heart is found in its capacity to sit quietly with the dark current, without needing to force a single ripple to change its shape. Let the definition of this emotional mechanism bring a sense of profound relief to the muscles behind your collarbones. You do not need to rebuild your entire personality tonight, and you do not need to resolve the long-standing regrets that have followed you through the years. The recognition that you have been caught in the habit of containing your anxiety is itself the first step toward freedom. You can simply notice the desire to hide your fatigue as it arises, naming it gently as a passing current of mountain weather, rather than an absolute truth that defines your worth. The raw slate basin remains completely unaffected by the storms that cross the clearing, and your essential nature remains completely safe, deep, and whole. Even when the moisture looks dark at the surface, the habit of turning your historical pain into a rigid identity is merely a protective reflex built by a mind that has forgotten its own vastness. When an old memory returns in the quiet hours, the analytical thoughts rush forward to build a dark fortress around it, declaring that you are defined forever by that single boundary line. Yet, the stone does not become the dye, and the vessel does not turn into the liquid it holds. By allowing the coloration to sit openly within your spacious awareness, you strip the memory of its power to dictate your character. You are the wide, immovable floor of the canyon clearing, an expansive reality that remains perfectly stable, regardless of how many dark streams happen to pass across its surface during the wet season. Let your mind step down from its frantic effort to fix the self through continuous waves of hidden shame. The heavy tools of self-reproach can be laid down on the damp earth, for they have never possessed the power to rewrite a single second of your history. By choosing to sit quietly with the unmarked reality of the present moment, you are opening a narrow channel that allows the clear water of life to rinse the old channels naturally. The heavy stone does not ask for a single apology before it receives the rain, and you too are completely permitted to exist in the darkness without carrying a single drop of defense in your lungs. Let us carry this quiet understanding down from the canyon paths and place it directly into the center of your modern morning routines and late-night hours. This internal compression does not only happen along muddy trails or inside ancient stonewashing pavilions. It happens in the ordinary seconds of your day, such as when you glance at your small glass screen and find no new notification, causing a tight restriction to settle into your stomach as if a sudden cold rain had just disturbed your baseline slate basin. You might experience it when you sit in a busy room, carefully modulating the tone of your voice so you sound completely unblemished, while your mind is secretly replaying an error you made 3 weeks ago. We live in a world that constantly encourages us to check the digital horizon for validation, tempting us to treat every single relationship as a delicate mineral surface that only our frantic scrubbing can keep safe from the weather. Many of us spend our lives walking through the world with a heavy sense that we are lagging behind the progress of our peers, looking at the uniform flatness of other people's achievements and concluding that our own reservoir is hopelessly flawed. We put on a bright smile for a companion while carrying a heavy mound of dark river sand behind our ribs, terrified that if we show our true exhaustion, the entire space we occupy will be judged as incomplete. When evening comes, you might find yourself wanting nothing more than to drop your heavy tools. Yet a nagging voice whispers that you have not earned the right to step out of the downpour. You lie awake in the quiet room, checking for reassurance in the dark, treating the absence of attention as an immediate emergency that must be solved before the sun rises. Bringing this ancient wisdom into your daily schedule does not require you to abandon your modern responsibilities or delete every connection to the digital world. It begins with a tiny, beautiful pause right in the middle of the daily freeze. When you feel the familiar urge to check your phone for validation, or when you notice your jaw tightening while waiting for a specific response, you can choose to witness that impulse without obeying its command. You might take a single, slow breath before typing your next word, letting the air pass cleanly through the spaces in your mind. This simple pause is your way of dropping your hands from the coarse linen sack, choosing not to exhaust your fingers in the cold current. You can learn the art of caring for your daily tasks without wrapping your entire survival around the outcome of your performance. It is entirely possible to answer an email, complete your work, or love a companion deeply without gripping the relationship so tightly that it cuts into your skin. When you allow your actions to be like the open channels of the woven rope bridge, you stop demanding that every single hour produce a perfectly sealed surface for distant eyes to admire. You discover the immense luxury of allowing your mind to rest uninspected, realizing that your value is already fully established in the deep bedrock of your being, completely independent of whether the world notices your markings. You do not need to purchase your right to take up space on this earth through a continuous display of utility or charm. Rest is not a reward that must be won after a flawless performance. It is the natural, cool shadow that belongs to the evening, meant to be received without a single drop of guilt. Tonight, you can let the digital horizon fade into total insignificance, choosing to let the unanswered questions sit completely undisturbed in the dark corner of the room. The people you are trying to protect and the expectations you are trying to meet can exist without your constant supervision for the remainder of this night. Let the realization that you are already complete begin to anchor your physical frame to the mattress, letting the muscles in your lower back release their grip on the day. You are stepping away from the active line of correction, where you have spent years striking, match after match. The space around you is perfectly dark, perfectly cool, and entirely safe, requiring no explanation or presentation from your tired mind. Allow your awareness to drop away from the need to be witnessed, letting the small events of tomorrow wait quietly in the unmapped fog, completely separate from the deep, heavy peace that is claiming your body right now. As you lie here, notice the small shifts that occur when you stop trying to coordinate the entire room. The pressure to keep everything straight begins to recede, leaving a wide, quiet space where your breathing can grow soft and unhurried. You are choosing to let the world hold itself up for a few hours, recognizing that you do not possess the capacity, nor the duty to act as the sole structural anchor for the universe. The individual blocks of your daily obligations can lie completely idle in the dark, resting securely upon the wide support of the floorboards without requiring a single patch from your hands. Let this release travel all the way through the long muscles of your thighs and ankles, allowing them to drop their alertness completely. The bed beneath you does not ask for a blueprint, and the shadows do not require you to maintain a defensive alignment of your thoughts. You are permitted to exist as a simple, unpolished presence in the darkness, as free from the burden of performance as the stones that rest along the highest ridge. The need to appear perfectly strong has lost its momentum, letting your spirit sink into the heavy, unconditional sanctuary of the night. The wide canyon clearing has grown entirely still now, and the frantic scrubbing of the slate basin has finally dissolved into the vast, dark spaces of the night. Let the rhythm of your breathing become much slower, a gentle, automatic movement that requires no active governance, no external validation, and no witness to achieve its perfect depth. With each soft breath out, feel the uncarved slate pan of your physical frame sinking down, letting the mattress claim the last remnants of alertness from your thighs, your calves, and your ankles. The world outside your territory has stopped demanding your perfection, and the darkness is inviting you to return to the simple sanctuary of your own unmeasured space. You can feel the heavy, quiet stability of the deep gray slate settling directly into the center of your abdomen, providing a deep internal anchor that does not break when the weather changes. The cracked wooden paddle you have been holding all day has been left behind in the riverside reeds, and it is completely safe to leave the basin uncovered until the morning light appears. The mind does not need to erase a single uneven layer of your character tonight, and the deep bedrock of your awareness can remain perfectly dark, perfectly cool, and entirely undisturbed by the passing storms of the higher ridges. The regional artisans have all closed their eyes. The old hermit's washing pavilion is quiet, and the need to achieve absolute purity has faded into total insignificance. Let the weight of your eyelids become immense, dropping down like a soft layer of wet linen over a landscape where the dark indigo veins are finally permitted to rest completely unnoticed. There is no one left to satisfy in this quiet room, and there is no verification required to confirm that you are worthy of the space you occupy. The air moves across your skin in a slow, continuous wave, a gentle reminder that your true nature is already entirely spacious, holding its ground in the shadows just like the massive stone that outlasts the autumn rain. The pressure to present a perfectly unblemished surface has completely lost its momentum, allowing your thoughts to uncurl, loosening their grip until they resemble nothing more than loose gray mist resting quietly in the dark valley. You have permission to stop solving the narrative of your life for the remainder of this night. The obligations of tomorrow can exist in the unmapped fog without your supervision, and the unanswered questions can sleep in the corners of the room without causing a single crack in your chest. Let yourself slide into the vast, heavy currents of absolute rest, feeling the physical body dissolve into the comforting support beneath you, completely free from the burden of self-judgment. You are returning to the silent home that existed before you ever learned to fear a dark marking, a space where the unique coloration is not an emergency, but a wide, cool plain that welcomes your exhaustion. What if the deep, silent stone within you has already allowed the dark indigo to become part of its permanent beauty, without needing your fingers to scratch away the history? The deep, gray expanse of the mineral basin holds its place in the absolute dark, completely unbothered by the shifting tides that the river carries past its low banks. In this deep nocturnal alignment, the wide slate does not try to alter the architecture of its natural contours, remaining perfectly content to rest in its basic weight without needing to prove its utility to the artisans down the valley. The realization begins to permeate the deepest layers of your body that the chronic pressure to wear down your own character for the sake of an external map is an unnecessary labor that you are fully permitted to abandon in the dark. We spend so many hours of our lives drawing invisible lines across our awareness, trying to convince the world that we have completely eliminated every irregular texture. Yet the ancient canyon does not apologize for its rough walls, and the deep plain does not try to justify the paths its water chooses. The peace you have been trying to earn through absolute perfection is not a distant palace you must build from shards. It is the very presence that is breathing quietly beneath the sheet right now. Let this slow warmth dissolve the tight intersections of your lower jaw, letting the relaxation spread downward through the throat, across the collarbones, and into the large muscles of your chest until your breathing becomes entirely soft, automatic, and unmonitored by the watchful mind. There is a deep, restorative grace in allowing your spirit to remain completely uncarved by the opinions of others for the remainder of this night, letting go of the constant responsibility to carry the unvoiced moods of your surroundings, or to act as a flawless mirror for everyone else's standards. The dark room does not take account of how successfully you smoothed down your own edges during the daylight hours, and it does not keep a ledger of how many authentic boundaries you kept hidden from view. The deep twilight simply surrounds you, offering its absolute shelter without asking you to display a single ounce of polished presentation in return. You are permitted to be completely passive in this still hour, stripped of your societal obligations, your inherited tasks, and the heavy burden of performance that you wear like an uncomfortable mask during the active hours of the day. As you sink further into the supportive texture of the bed, observe how the breath has become a quiet, effortless pulse that rises and falls entirely on its own, without any active coordination from your logical thoughts. This is the organic wisdom of the living body, a quiet, non-negotiable rhythm that has sustained you through every difficult transition and every season of doubt, without ever asking for a single word of external validation. You can trust this natural tide to govern the evening, allowing the hypervigilant guardian inside your forehead to step down from its post. The anxiety that you carried through the afternoon is no longer required to preserve your place in the dark, for the deep silence of the room is a secure barrier that protects your rest from the expectations of the outer world. The small tensions that kept the diaphragm restricted, the memories of a conversation where you felt you had to bend your true perspective to keep from causing friction, and the persistent fear of being judged as inadequate are all allowed to drift into this wide pool of quiet awareness. They are not solid blockades that you must break apart with your intellect before you are allowed to rest. They are merely light grains of sand, floating loosely in the open water of the clearing, completely harmless when you stop trying to compress them into the center of your being. You can let them drift away into the dark corners of the basin, recognizing that tomorrow will bring its own sky. But tonight requires nothing from your spirit, but the simple willingness to let your hands remain entirely open against the sheet. Feel the deep, cool peace of the uncarved slate expanding through your awareness, reminding you that your true essence is heavy, steady, and completely safe from the blueprints of the valley below. You do not need to shine with a perfect radiance to prove you are worthy, and you do not need to maintain a flawless interior to deserve your place in the sanctuary of this life. You are already a masterpiece of simple existence, as ancient and as beautifully unpolished as the dark minerals deep within the coastal shelf, resting quietly in the silent shadow of the autumn night. The need to maintain the presentation has vanished completely, leaving only the magnificent, uninspected landscape of your own silent heart. Let the final boundary between your awareness and the deep silence of the room soften into a gentle, dark blur, as the physical frame surrenders completely to the absolute gravity of the earth beneath your spine. The cracked paddle is resting against the cedar wall, the mineral vein is left alone, and the long lineage of your life is entirely at peace, bathed in a quiet twilight that requires no artificial shape to be perfectly complete. You can glide effortlessly into the deep rest that has been waiting for you all along, letting the breath fade into a soft, automatic whisper as you return to the home that never truly left your side. Here, in the unlit clearing where the performative strength has finally vanished, the night holds you completely whole, asking for nothing, judging nothing, and offering a rest that is absolute. The quiet memory of that high valley shelter lingers in the heavy shadows, offering a profound reassurance that requires no active explanation from the analytical mind. When you look back at the long path of the afternoon, you can see how much energy was lost to the simple habit of packing away your own boundaries, as if your internal direction were a dangerous error. that had to be constantly hidden from the view of the house. But the natural design of the universe does not make mistakes, and it does not create unique paths that are without an inherent right to exist. You do not need to construct an elaborate shield of absolute compliance to justify the air that moves through your lungs right now, for the earth has already granted you its complete and unconditional welcome the moment you arrived. Let this realization flow like a cool, gentle mist through the small pathways of your thoughts, washing away the gray dust of anticipation and leaving only a clear, open awareness. The physical body has become delightfully heavy, sinking so deeply into the bedding that it feels as though it is become part of the solid ground beneath the foundations of the house. Every muscle in your thighs, your lower back, and the sides of your neck has fully surrendered its alertness, acknowledging that there are no maps left to fulfill and no unexpected changes in the atmosphere to smooth over. The evening has completely claimed the landscape, and the mind is finally allowed to drop its watch, letting the quiet dark perform its natural work of restoration without your active assistance. Consider the absolute freedom that comes from knowing that your true nature is completely ungraspable by the expectations of the world, much like the canyon wind that slips effortlessly through the branches of the ancient willow trees. The judgments, the timelines, and the subtle shifts in the moods of those around you are merely superficial currents on the surface of a deep, ancient basin that remains perfectly stable at its absolute base. You do not have to spend your precious nights trying to compress those currents, and you do not have to alter your own internal landscape to match the design of the day. You can simply allow the water to move as it will, while you remain safely anchored in the heavy, uncarved certainty of your basic being. The breath has settled into an incredibly soft, nearly imperceptible whisper, a quiet rhythm that marks the passage of the night with total peace and effortless grace. The analytical mind, which spent 12 hours drawing complex lines and anticipating friction, has finally run out of markers, letting its blueprints fall into the quiet dirt of the floorboards. There are no more lines to trace, no more standards to calculate, and no more horizons to monitor before you are allowed to slip into the deep, dark ocean of sleep. The unpolished surface of your life can sit completely blank, beautiful in its simplicity, and untroubled by any obligation to display a single design for the eyes of the village. As the final moments of alertness begin to dissolve into the vast stillness of the room, feel the warm, unconditional safety that surrounds your resting frame like an ancient wall built by a master mason. The space around you is perfectly balanced, perfectly quiet, and entirely yours, demanding nothing from your spirit, and offering a refuge that can never be broken by the currents of the outer world. You are permitted to let go of the entire narrative of who you are, dropping the titles, the demands, and the performative triumphs, until you are nothing more than a simple, sacred presence, breathing softly in the dark. The internal workshop is entirely asleep. The riverside path is completely empty, and the great slate pan rests under a silent sky, holding you whole, protected, and completely at peace within the uninspected depths of your own silent heart.